Chéquele si quiere.
All right. All right, let's take a look. Have you updated or made any changes to the Canvas page,
Yes.
steps 1 through 4?
I think so.
All right, so I wish to learn more about implicit grammar difficulties because I want to find out how teachers implement their activities according to what they think their students' main problems are, and identify significant differences in teachers. All right, so remember in step 1 there are three sections to that prompt. Okay, let's look at this as an example. The next one of your classmates here. I wish to learn more about something. That's one section.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to find out, that's the second section, something. And then in order to put, and it can be in order to understand or in order to do something.
Mm-hmm.
That's the third section, and that third section is what you're missing here.
Okay.
So maybe revisit this. You've got the first two sections, but you're
Yes.
missing the third.
Mm-hmm.
So double check that. And I think as a result, you have almost too much information now in the second. But let's look at this, because there's some things here that I want to talk about where you mentioned that you want to find out how teachers implement their activities. Okay? Because from this section, because I want to find out, this is where we're going to get our research questions. Do you have your research questions? All right, so let's take a look. Now, your research questions, again, are going to come from this. How do I want to implement activities according to what they think their students' main problems are, and identify significant differences in teachers' perceptions. Okay, so let's take a look at your research questions. First one. What are EFL teachers' perceptions of the difficulties of students and teachers with regard to grammar instruction? What are the EFL teachers' perceptions of the difficulties of students and teachers with regard to grammar instruction? So you're interested in what are EFL teachers' perceptions of other teachers too? I mean, I understand what are the teachers' perceptions of their own students,
Mm-hmm.
but you also mentioned and teachers. So you're going to be asking your participants, your teachers, about other teachers, or
About the difficulties
Adelante.
they face.
Hola, buenas tardes.
¿qué tal? Vengo por el servicio.
Ok, ahorita tengo clase. No sé si puedes regresar cuando no tenga clase.
¿A la una está bien?
Sí, a la 1. Sí, gracias. Okay, what were you saying? So are you going to ask your teachers, your participants, about other teachers, or?
Yeah, about the difficulties they faced in implicit grammar, and what are the difficulties that they think that their students have.
Okay, but not about other teachers.
No.
Okay, so I would take out and teachers,
Oh.
because that sounds like you're going to be asking your teachers about other teachers, like in general, which I would suggest not doing. I would just limit to whatever your participants, your teachers feel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are there any so number 2, are there any differences in teachers' perceptions between the difficulties faced by teachers and those faced by students? Do these perceptions...
I wanted to compare the answers among the teachers that I was going to interview, and I wanted to compare if the answers were the same, or the same problems.
Okay, so you have this, how teachers implement their activities. So what's one question that relates to this? How teachers, you want to find out how teachers implement their activities. So what's a research question that focuses on that?
It would be like escribí 4, no sé si un otro. Okay.
Are there any?
I wanted to find out if the difficulties that they think that the students have are the same, and if they take into consideration that perception in order to choose the activities that they use.
Okay.
I
So,
don't know if
all right. So here, all right. So let's go back to this. So you want to find out how teachers implement their activities. I think here we can narrow this down to ask, I want to find out how teachers implement implicit grammar activities. Now, we say activities, right? We say activities, but how many activities? Because remember, this has to be something that you can measure. You want to find out something that is possible that you can do, right, this semester. So how many activities? Well, if we say implicit activities, we're narrowing it down, okay? So just try to be conscious of how many activities that you are able to observe, and what activities, implicit activities, are you going to include in your literature review.
Okay, but what happens if I say these kind of activities, but the teachers that I am observing are not using those activities? That's why I didn't know if...
Well, there should be some theoretical, I mean, you're going to talk about maybe some activities as examples, but you're more importantly going to talk about the theoretical concepts that relate to implicit grammar teaching. Some theory, some theoretical social cultural theory, scaffolding, zone of proximal development, maybe some social linguistic theoretical concepts. So you're basically, you know, looking at the theory, which would apply to a lot of different types of activities, and maybe you mention a few as an example, but the idea is you present theory that relate to virtually any type of implicit activity, and then you look for teachers who are using implicit grammar, right, activities, or right. And we're saying activities, but they could be techniques, they could be methods, they could be materials. I mean, so here I think we need to have a research question about the activities, because you're limiting your research questions now to just perception. So you want to find out about how teachers implement implicit grammar activities, or you can even state it like how teachers teach grammar overtly or covertly, right? Which is related, overt, covert, or implicit, explicit, right? You may be comparing and contrasting implicit learning versus explicit learning, overt, covert grammar, that type of thing.
Or the most common activities.
Well, you're going to be throwing in activities as an example, but you're not the concept. Here are some concepts that you can think about: implicit, explicit grammar, overt, covert grammar, implicit, incidental learning. These are concepts that you can discuss and talk about.
Okay.
That's in the literature. Okay.
Because I was having problems in deciding the topics that I was going to write in the lit review, and actually I wrote something, some topics or something like that. Those ones.
Okay, grammatical difficulty in second language learning, different perceptions. All right. I need to see your thesis statement, because part of this is to align first the research questions to your thesis statement here. Your
Okay.
thesis statement is going to be that one sentence that captures the main idea of your entire literature
The
review.
thesis statement has to answer all the questions in one sentence, right?
Yeah, generally speaking, right? It's one sentence that, but yeah, it answers your research questions generally speaking. Then you're going to talk more specifically throughout your entire literature review, forming an argument why this thesis statement answers your research questions.
But do I have to do it right now before I start with the lit review? Because I don't know if the thesis statement that I'm going to write right now is going to be correct.
Okay,
Or
here's how this works, right? You want to come up with a thesis statement and your research questions together right now at the beginning.
Mhm.
Now, when you start to write out your main headings, okay, you're constantly looking at your thesis statement, asking yourself, okay, do my main headings talk and address my thesis statement? And if you answer yourself, well, no, then you have two options. One is change your heading, or the second is modify or change your thesis statement. So you're constantly going back and forth between the thesis statement and the main headings.
Mhm.
Then once you start developing, you're constantly going back and forth between, okay, and what is what I'm saying here talking about these topics, and is this related to my thesis statement? So you're constantly going back throughout the writing process, and this is why for me it's important for you to write out your thesis statement now, because it could change and very well will change, and that's perfectly fine. At the end of the day, right, when you finish your literature review, the first thing I'm going to check is, do your main headings talk about your thesis statement? Does your thesis statement address some answer to your research questions? Okay, then I'm going to go on to look at each section to see how it's aligned.
Okay.
So do this exercise in this way, and I think it'll be easier, right? Because I want you to be thinking constantly when you're writing your literature review about your thesis statement and your research questions. Always, every time you contribute and start writing, every day that you write, first look at your research questions and your thesis statement again and ask yourself, okay, do I understand? Is this aligned? And then start writing so that you are more likely to include information that's on topic. Yeah. So it's okay if you have to modify it.
Okay.
That's fine.
But
But it's a starting point. And it gives you, and it gets you thinking about the main idea of your literature review, right? Because everything in your literature review is supportive of this thesis statement, this main idea of your research. And you really are developing an argument. You're saying, really, that, you know, in this case, implicit grammar, in so many words, your thesis is your implicit grammar teaching is good, is recommended. There's some benefits of teaching implicit grammar. Maybe as to motivate students or to learn, instead of the explicit way that is, you know, it's boring, and at the end of the day the students aren't learning as well. So your thesis is basically that, is implicit grammar is good, right? And you're going to develop a good sentence to say that, and you may give reasons. Implicit grammar achieves this, this, and this. And you talk about this, this, and this in your theory. Or in your literature review. Yes. Or maybe you say implicit grammar is helpful because it incorporates three aspects of social cultural theory, 1, 2, and 3. And those 1, 2, those 3 sections are what you mentioned here. It can be very explicit in your thesis statement. You can list 3 things, and you talk about those 3 things in your literature review as headings.
But in that way, I will not be talking about the difficulties, right?
I don't know, maybe, I don't know. I mean,
grammar.
The difficulties of what?
That teachers and students face with implicit grammar.
You can talk about the difficulty. I mean, I'm giving you an example, a very general example of, but the idea is, my point is that you can explicitly list out 3 things or 2 things or 4 things in your thesis statement and use those same words in your headings here.
Yeah.
And I think by doing that in the one sentence, you're going to find ways, because right now, to be honest, I think it's going to be difficult to include these 4 things in one sentence in a coherent way. And so I think this is what you need to do now, is think of this thesis statement and these headings and get this worked out in your mind based on all the research that you've seen. I'm not saying you need to take any of this stuff out. Maybe you talk about all this, but maybe in a different heading that's called something else that makes logical sense, because that's what we need to achieve here, is some sort of logical order, right? And when I say logical order, and I talk about this in Canvas in week 2, developing an argument.
Yes, I actually watched a video.
Okay.
I think just one.
Okay, there are 2 videos in there. The first video is me talking, and then there's another video at the bottom that's like an hour long that's also very good. In my video, I mentioned basically different, some examples of how you can organize your work. And one way is chronologically by time. So maybe there's a history of it, of literature that follows some sort of chronological order. Another option, you can talk about the theoretical concepts, theoretical to the practical. That's another option. Another option could be the general to the specific, or even the specific to the general. Okay, these are just general ways that you can organize information. You might find, since this is an argument, you're going to want to also talk about counter arguments. So you're going to be talking about implicit grammar. Maybe you talk about implicit, like I mentioned before, like implicit, explicit. So maybe talk about that. Then incidental, intentional. These are contrasting views, and these are all just different ways that you can organize your data. But it should try to follow some sort of logical order. So we have here grammatical difficulties in language learning. Now we have different perceptions of teachers and students' difficulties. So for me, this is not really clear. Are we talking about grammar or other? What types of difficulties are we referring to? Like, it's not really clear. Like, it might need to be clear. Second language proficiency. Now this is just general, like really general. So for me, this doesn't really follow a logical order. Maybe, are you concerned about, because in your research questions, you're talking about grammar, no? So everything needs to be related to grammar in some way. So if you talk about second language proficiency, that includes reading, writing, listening, speaking, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, ¿qué más? Muchas cosas. So maybe that doesn't fit there. I mean, talk about grammar and think about, okay, all the different ways of grammar. There's terms like grammaring. That's another concept you can look up and talk about. What is grammaring and how does that relate to implicit grammar? Okay. What else? Talking about implicit or covert grammar might be like integrating the skills, like skill integration into grammar teaching. So you're not teaching grammar in isolation. You're teaching it through maybe performance tasks. I mean, performance tasks could be a section. See what I mean? It's all about grammar, but performance tasks meaning you look at all the skills and you're learning grammar through all of the skills. So you're contrasting individual skill development versus integration or integrating the skills. These are all theoretical things that you can talk about. I mean, there's a lot of things you can talk about. You need to really narrow it down, and they all need to relate to grammar, implicit grammar teaching. or there needs to be a relationship with implicit grammar teaching. Does that make sense? Okay.
Actually, I also found some other research articles or some other articles, and I think they can be also useful, but I don't know if you can
You
tell
want-
me if it is.
All right. If you want to, do you have a specific question about? The thing is, you know what I'd like to do first? I mean, I'd like for you to come up with these headings first, and then maybe we can look at these articles. I mean, because more than likely, I'm going to say yes, you can use that. I mean, you can use almost all of this to a certain degree, but it needs to be more specific. So what I need here is for you to come up with a thesis statement, so that I know kind of the main idea. And then we can say, okay, let's look at this article, let's look at this topic, let's look at this research question. And then talk about, okay, all in terms of this thesis statement, with the idea that we can always change the thesis statement. But it gives us a starting point, because that tells us the one idea, right, that you want to talk about. Right, because I think that looking at more articles, I'm not sure how productive it's going to be, because I'm giving you a lot of different options. I mean, there are a lot of different options that you can take, and I think right now we need to narrow down our discussion. And again, grammaring, implicit, explicit, overt, covert grammar, incidental, intentional learning. What else? Teaching, integrating the skills versus teaching skills separately. Okay, because this is all going to be related, and when you look and observe other teachers and how they are teaching implicit grammar, these are things that are going to come up. Are they teaching implicitly or explicitly? Are they teaching overt or covert? Are they teaching grammaring? Are they integrating the other skills, or are they teaching grammar in isolation? It's all related to implicit grammar. See what I mean? And these are all theoretical ways of learning, theoretical ideas that you can discuss in your literature review.
Okay.
Does that help? Does that,
Yes.
you see kind of where I'm going with this? Like it's, and any research that you find on implicit grammar, look in their theory and see what they're talking about. Also, see what kind of theoretical concepts that they're addressing. But I think in general we can try to come up with a thesis statement and then come up with your 2 to 4 main sections. I think that's a fairly good number for the length of this paper, anywhere from 2 to 4. If you have 2 headings, you might even have a couple level 3 headings, subheadings within those 2, right? But if you have 3 or 4 level 2 headings, I don't think you'll need any more subheadings within these headings here. So let's do this. Revisit your research questions, add your thesis statement, add these main headings, and if you want to look at it, you want to discuss it, or you want to send me an email and you want me to make comments in Google Drive, let's do that. But let's do that between now and hopefully today or tomorrow, so you can start writing, because
Yes.
we got to start writing. We got to start writing. So hopefully you can do this today, preferably. If you want to come back later today or send me an email, send me an email. But I want to have a discussion. I want to look at and give you feedback before you start writing, because this is the hard part here to doing what we're doing right now. I think if you get the order and you get clear in your mind these research questions, the thesis statement, everything else, I think it'll be easier to draft your thesis, your research, your literature review, as well as do your research later on. And I think you can, in general, have fewer questions about perceptions and add 1 or 2 questions about the actual implementation. How do teachers implement implicit grammar, all right, in their teaching, right? Or how do they, what language do they use, right? And we can also change the research questions later too if we have to.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to get us a little closer now. I want, so we, based on, again, what you have here in Canvas, and you may need to revisit this also and update this and add this third section in order to that we talked about earlier. Okay, so modify this in Canvas, modify this document, send me an email or come by my office when you've made those changes. And if you want to look at additional articles or talk about what you have here, we can do that. But it'll get us a little bit closer as to what direction you want to take your research.
Okay.
¿Cómo ves? What do you think?
Muy bien. Sí, de hecho eso era lo que más tenía como la duda.
Okay.
Pero como qué temas específicamente tendría que escoger para, bueno, para hablar en el lead review. Eso era como lo que más...
Yeah.
No sabía en sí si los temas que estaba escogiendo eran los adecuados para el lead review.
I'm going to say one more thing here about your research questions, because you mentioned here gender, level taught, qualifications. You can focus on those aspects only. I mean, focus very specifically on those in your research questions and in your thesis statement and in your literature review. I mean, talking about just gender, talking about what is gender, that could be some theory there. Maybe see level taught, talking about maybe contrasting differences maybe with level perhaps. But you have here very specific examples, and I know this is based on some research that you have. Look at that research and see kind of how they adapted. What is their thesis statement? Look for their thesis statement. Look for the main idea. Now the thesis statement will be somewhere in the introduction typically, like we're doing. It may be one sentence, it may be one or two sentences, it may be a paragraph where they develop the main idea, but they should have in the introduction some sort of thesis statement, or it should be very clear what the main idea is, and get some ideas, right? And even use whatever you feel is worthy of your own research, and try to get some ideas, right? But this is just an example. Use this and maybe build on this and as you develop your own research questions. And I think you can scale down your research questions. I would say probably 2 or 3 research questions. I would say probably no more than 3. Okay. I would rather have 2 or 3 really good research questions than maybe a couple that are that may be beyond the scope of your actual research. And always ask yourself, how am I going to measure what I'm asking? Because what you're asking here, you will later have to measure this and find out, how you're going to analyze it. So try to keep that in mind also whenever you're developing your research questions, that later you're going to have to be able to do something with this information. Just let's do that, and see me or send me an email once you've made those changes, so you can start writing up your literature review.
Okay.
Alrighty.
I'm gonna try to do it today, and I'm going to send you an email.
Okay. And I'll make comments directly to Google Drive here, but also please update this information as well, because I'll be going back and forth. I'll be looking at this and looking at this, right? And because this kind of helps me. This and should help you. Keep this up to date too. Anytime you make changes here, always go back and make changes here, because this also, if you look at this and read this, the idea is it's very clear as to the purpose of your research, right? So try to keep this information in Canvas updated as well. Okay, so send me an email and I'll take another look at it once you've made those changes, so we can proceed forward.
Okay.
Alrighty?
Yeah.
Alright, Luis.
Okay, thank you.
Alright, you're welcome.